Get ready for a wild, action-packed adventure with Stuart Little and the Secret of Central Park. Watch as Stuart embarks on a heartwarming journey through the sprawling park, meeting new friends, solving hidden mysteries, and discovering the true meaning of courage. From thrilling twists to heartfelt moments, this is one adventure you won't want to miss. Make sure to stay until the very end for a surprise that will leave you smiling. If you love Stuart's adventures, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fun-filled journeys. In a quiet corner of New York City, tucked away in a charming brownstone, lived a family unlike any other. The Little family, Mr. and Mrs. Little, their son George, and their newest, smallest member, Stuart Little. Stuart wasn't your ordinary child. He was a mouse born into a human family, and though this seemed odd to some, the Littles had grown accustomed to the small but mighty Stuart, who, despite his size, possessed a heart as grand as the tallest skyscraper in the city. Stuart's life with the Littles was filled with both ordinary and extraordinary moments. He joined George in all sorts of adventures, from building model boats to learning to ride a bike, although his bike was no bigger than a child's toy. Stuart loved his family deeply, and they, in turn, loved him. However, there was something about Stuart that set him apart. He had an insatiable thirst for adventure, one that the four walls of their cozy home could never fully contain. One crisp autumn morning, as the golden light of the sun filtered through the tall buildings, Stuart sat on the windowsill of his bedroom, gazing longingly at the bustling world outside. The leaves, painted in shades of orange and red, danced in the wind, and Stuart felt a familiar tug in his chest, the call of adventure. As much as he cherished his family, Stuart often felt that he was meant for something more, something beyond the confines of his little life in the city. That day, as he watched the leaves swirl in the wind, he made up his mind. He was going to embark on an adventure of his own. With a swift determination, Stuart began preparing. He packed a tiny knapsack, barely the size of a teacup, with essentials, a spool of thread, a small sewing needle, perfect for self-defense if need be, a tiny canteen, and a map that Mr. Little had drawn for him. It wasn't much, but Stuart believed in the power of resourcefulness. After all, being a mouse in a human world meant knowing how to make do with what you had. He left a note for his family, explaining that he was going on a journey, but would return soon. Stuart knew that Mr. and Mrs. Little would worry, but he also knew they'd understand. His adventure wasn't just about seeing the world, it was about finding himself. Stuart's first destination was Central Park, a place he'd only ever heard about in stories from George. Central Park was vast, full of trees and paths, lakes and bridges, and so much more than Stuart could have imagined. For a mouse, Central Park was an entire world. He made his way there on foot, occasionally hitching a ride on the back of a friendly dog or catching a lift in the basket of a passing cyclist. By the time he arrived at the park's entrance, the sun was high in the sky, casting warm light over the sprawling greenery. With excitement bubbling in his chest, Stuart ventured deep into the park. The towering trees were like ancient guardians, and the paths seemed to stretch on forever. As he wandered, Stuart encountered all sorts of creatures: pigeons that cooed lazily from branches above, squirrels that darted through the leaves, and even a group of turtles basking in the afternoon sun by the lake. But Stuart wasn't here just to sightsee. He was searching for something, though he wasn't quite sure what. Perhaps it was the feeling of freedom, or maybe it was the idea that somewhere in the vastness of the world, there were others like him, small but capable, brave yet humble. After hours of walking, Stuart came upon a small clearing where a group of animals had gathered. At the center was a wise old owl, her feathers a deep shade of brown, streaked with silver. The other animals seemed to be listening intently to her words. Intrigued, Stuart approached cautiously. Though he was a mouse, he'd never been afraid of larger animals. In fact, his size often made him underestimated, something he used to his advantage. The owl turned her head slowly, her large, golden eyes settling on Stuart. A new traveler, she said, her voice deep and calm. What brings you here, little one? Stuart cleared his throat and stood tall, though he barely came up to the knees of the smallest rabbit in the group. "I'm Stuart Little," he said proudly, "and I've come to see the world beyond my home." The owl nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. "The world is vast and you are small," she said, her voice tinged with wisdom. "But size is not what matters. It is the strength of one's heart, the courage to seek what is unknown, and the wisdom to know when to return." Stuart listened closely, hanging on every word. The animals around him were silent, respecting the owl's wisdom. "Tell me, Stuart," she continued, "what is it you seek on your journey?" Stuart paused. He had asked himself that question many times, but now, in the presence of this wise creature, he knew the answer. "I seek to know where I belong," he said quietly. "I love my family, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more to life than what I've seen." The owl's eyes softened, and she nodded again. "You belong where your heart is at peace," she said. "Sometimes that place is where we started, and sometimes it is where the journey takes us. But the only way to know is to explore both." Stuart felt a wave of understanding wash over him. He had left home to find adventure, but what he had discovered was something far more valuable: wisdom. The world was full of wonders, but his place in it was not defined by where he went. It was defined by who he was and the love he had for those who cared for him. After the gathering dispersed, Stuart spent the rest of the day wandering the park, reflecting on the owl's words. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground. As the sky turned shades of pink and purple, Stuart knew it was time to return home. He found his way back to the brownstone, tired but content. The Littles were overjoyed to see him, and though they had been worried, they were proud of his bravery. As Stuart settled back into his tiny bed that night, he realized something important. Adventure wasn't just about far-off places or dangerous quests. Adventure was about learning, growing, and understanding the world, and yourself just a little bit better each day. Stuart Little may have been small in size, but his heart and spirit were as vast as the world itself. And though his journey had ended for now, he knew there would always be more to discover, both in the world and within himself. With that thought, Stuart drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the next adventure, but also happy in the knowledge that he had already found the greatest treasure of all: home.